What's going on, my man? Great to see you once again. Let's start with this. What does Rivalry Week mean to you as a former player and now someone who talks about the SEC for a living?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Chris? I mean, when I think about Rivalry Week, I think about stepping outside of the conference. You know, you do that in the first couple weeks of the season, and then you're kind of in the grind of playing SEC teams. And Rivalry Week, to me, means stepping outside of the conference. Now, that's not true for Auburn and Alabama. It's not true for Ole Miss and Mississippi State. But I think about Florida. I think about Kentucky. I think about South Carolina. I think about Georgia, all playing ACC opponents. And what a great opportunity it is for, one, the SEC to kind of reclaim its reputation with an out-of-conference sweep of four ACC teams. But what that would also mean to that conference, to potentially knock Florida State out of the college football playoffs, to take both teams that are playing in the ACC championship down the week before they meet in Charlotte there. So I just think of the respect that I have for Florida's main rivals in this conference, Georgia, Tennessee, LSU, and then I think about the disdain I have for Florida State. It's a little different kind of feel when you're talking about playing non-SEC rivals.
Let's start on a different note, Chris, with Week 12. The Arkansas Razorbacks beat FIU 44-20 with the big news coming out of Fayetteville. Sam Pittman will be back in 2024 as confirmed by their athletic director. Your thoughts on the news? Obviously, Pittman, one of the most likable guys and one of the most liked coaches in the SEC. He gets another opportunity. Was that the right move, wrong move? Your thoughts on the decision by Arkansas?
I like it. It's a decisive move by Hunter Yurachek, the athletic director at Arkansas. It's not leaving Sam Pittman dangling. It's not leaving the players wondering what the future of their coach is. It's not letting the fan base get carried away with who's going to be the next coach of the Arkansas Razorbacks. And I think it gives you an opportunity to finish the season on a high note. They play at home against Missouri on Friday. They haven't played really well at home in conference games over the last month or so, dating back to that egg they laid against Mississippi State and then the debacle against Auburn 2 weeks ago. So this is a chance to, even if you don't win, to play competitively, to play with a passion, a sense of urgency, to send your fans off into the offseason with a little bit better feel for the season. But I think it's the right move. Sam Pittman, probably a victim of his own success, coming in and inheriting a mess from the previous coaching staff, getting them back on track sooner than even I think the most optimistic Razorback fan could have hoped. And so this gives them an opportunity to have a plan heading into the offseason. They've got to get better on the offensive line. They've got to find a way to replace production at the quarterback position and running back position. But I do think that with the transfer portal era, you can go out and overhaul lines of scrimmage much quicker than you used to be able to.
Speaking of that offensive line, Chris, I believe it's 42 sacks that Arkansas was surrendered. That's with a mobile quarterback. So certainly to your point, they got to get the offensive line shored up. Now, Chris, sticking with coaches who their seats are a bit warm, you could argue they're hot. We go to Como, where Florida, a valiant effort. I mean, admittedly, Chris, a much better effort than I thought Florida would give Missouri. Nearly pull off the win. Missouri's magical season continues, and they're probably who we should be talking about. But obviously, anytime a coach's job like Billy Napier comes into question, it seems like there's been more rumblings than maybe even I was expecting from the Florida fan base after a really frustrating loss. I think the way it happened, obviously. Your thoughts on this game as a whole? I thought Graham Mertz played like a warrior out there, man. I know he got hurt, and I had somebody this morning tell me that, that was a silly move. I'm like, it's a guy laying his body on the line, man. He's trying to get his team to a bowl game. I respect it. I have no problem with it. Thoughts on that ball game as a whole, and where do you sit right now with Billy Napier? And what are you hearing from the folks in Gainesville? Because, there's a lot of frustration, but there's still that buyout, and it's only year 2. So, overall status of Florida.
Hey, you know this better than anybody. Live by the sword, die by the sword. They made a 4th down play against South Carolina that won Florida the ball game on the road and probably didn't necessarily deserve to win that game. And go on the road against Como and probably do deserve to win the game against Missouri and let one get away with a 4th and 17 conversion. But I think part of the ascension of any program is figuring out how to win close ball games. Last year, Missouri was 2-4 in one-possession games. This year, they're 4-0, and you learn from some of those mistakes. Florida's going to learn from Trevor Etienne, 3rd and 12, not getting down in bounds to keep the clock running to force them to use a timeout, steps out of bounds, and and ultimately, it leaves too much time on the clock for Missouri. Fumbling the ball down inside the 10-yard line in the fourth quarter when you get an opportunity to get a touchdown there. There's multiple plays that if any one of those things goes differently, you probably win the ball game. But when you have young players and new guys trying to acclimate to the culture of a new team, you have those mistakes. I like Billy Napier a lot. I think one of the saving graces in terms of the patience that the fan base has had is because of the signing class that's been put together for 2024. Florida needs to do a good job of keeping that group together. I've already had a couple of flips that have now lowered that draft class or the signing class's status. But, I think at the end of the day, I'm with you. They fought gallantly. They had their left tackle out, their center out, their right tackle goes out early in the ballgame. So 3 backup offensive linemen, they still run for 261 yards. You lose Graham Mertz late in the third quarter, and I thought it was a tremendous play, a great sign of leadership. Third down, you're about 4 yards short. A guy laying his body on the line, like you said, to go get that first down. That's not thinking. That's just reaction. You can't coach that. That's a guy that wants it. And so I think that's a great example of leadership by example. And I think that Max Brown did a good job coming in off the bench cold, finding a way to make some plays on fourth down, trying to find a way to create some offense with his legs. This is a guy that's a mobile quarterback, a much different quarterback than Graham Mertz is. So I think they go back to the drawing board this week. They draw up some packages that Florida State's defense hadn't seen. And I think it makes them a dangerous team on Saturday going up against the Seminoles in Gainesville.
Chris, sticking with that game really quickly, Eli Drinkwitz deserves Coach of the Year in the SEC. Agree or disagree?
My first name on the ballot is actually Nick Saban. I think this is the best coaching job that he's had since he's been in Tuscaloosa, taking a team that had a lot of flaws, some moments of adversity that could have gone the other way, and turning that into a positive. He's number one on my list. I'd say Eli Drinkwitz 2 and Kirby Smart 3. I think Coach Saban and Coach Smart don't get the credit that they deserve for largely being celebrated as having the best players on their respective rosters. But in each of those cases, look at Georgia. I mean, they lost their offensive coordinator, lost their starting quarterback, lost a bunch of talent on defense, and they haven't missed a beat there either. So that would be my top 3 heading into that voting if it were me being part of it.
Now, Chris, to Columbia we go. South Carolina takes down Kentucky in a slugfest. I heard some of your comments briefly on SEC Network mentioning that arguably nobody does a better job of rallying the troops than Shane Beamer and the way he's able to hold this thing together. South Carolina 2-6 just a couple weeks ago. They were staring at an abysmal season. Now you bring yourself to 5-6, opportunity still to get to a bowl game. But that game on Saturday night, admittedly, Chris, I thought it was going to be a high-scoring game back and forth, and it was the slugfest that I guess nobody saw coming. Either way, though, the bottom line is this. You find a way to win that football game. You could not run the football, but your best players made big-time plays when you needed, and Spencer Rattler, Xavier Legette, and that defense stepped up unlike any time we've seen this season. Your just overall thoughts on that win, that atmosphere that was obviously the SEC Network game, just overall thoughts on that 17-14 victory that South Carolina had over Kentucky.
You said it. I mean, they found a way to win. And to me, that game was a microcosm of the South Carolina season, a season filled with adversity, a season filled with challenges, a season filled with bleak outlooks. And yet they found a way to win a football game when it doesn't look pretty. It certainly was a gutsy effort. The defense doing what you said, keeping Kentucky's offense in check. Maybe the biggest takeaway of the night was the Nick Emory interception down there in the end zone that thwarted a scoring opportunity for Kentucky. I just look at South Carolina. Spencer Rattler was carrying that offense in the first quarter, get up to that 10-0 lead. They put up 125 yards of offense, and then the rest of the ball game, they go 3 and out on 6 of their 9 possessions. They put up 132 yards of offense, but when they needed it most, they put one 9-play drive together to take the lead and never look back. The defense gets some big stops. The pressure they were able to put on Devin Leary in the last couple of Kentucky possessions were the difference in the ball game. And I love the storyline. I love Shane Beamer. Obviously, I think people by now understand how I feel about him, and so I'm a little biased. But I think, as you mentioned, nobody finds a way to get his team back up off the mat better than Shane Beamer does. And I'm excited to see if they can go win one more to get to bowl eligibility, which 6 wins, if you told the Gamecock fan base before the season they were going to win 6 games, I don't think they would have been too smoked up about it. But the opportunity to come from the depths of looking like they were going to just completely whiff on the opportunity to play in the bowl season to winning the final 4 games at home, winning over your rival, and doing so in a dramatic fashion the way that they have, I think would be a great cap to the season and send you into the offseason with some of the vibes you had last year after winning against Tennessee and Clemson at the end.
Chris, sticking with that ball game and Shane Beamer specifically, South Carolina moves to 8-3 in the month of November under his leadership. What do you make of that? I mean, it's becoming one of those things where, it's one thing to have a favorable schedule in the month of November and take advantage of it, but like this is year 3, and each of his first 3 seasons, they have done this. And I know a lot of fans will push back and say, well, why don't you get off to a quicker start, right? And I would argue that in the transfer portal era, there's so many moving pieces. We've never known less about these football teams. That includes the coaches, how the pieces are going to mesh until toe meets leather and we get the season going. There's no preseason, obviously. But, like, what do you make it? Like, when you look at this, it's like, how do you make sense of it? Like, why is South Carolina, why is Shane Beamer able to sort of push the right buttons? And it's just, we now know, I mean, going into next year, you're going to say to yourself, whatever the schedule is, we know for a fact South Carolina is going to be playing their best football at the end of the season. I guess some other teams could say that too, but isn't it odd? Yeah. Isn't it just funny how it just seems like they hit November and they hit a different gear?
That's what you want to do, right? You want to be peaking at the end of the year. You want to show improvement from where you started, and you want to be able to show signs of growth. I think they've done it, one, out of necessity because of all the injuries. I mean, the bright side of all of this is that you got a lot of young guys, some much important experience that's going to pay dividends next year for the South Carolina team. But I also look at what this season has meant to guys like Spencer Rattler, where comes back for another year and I think really shows himself as a great pro prospect, not only because of what he's done statistically, but what he's done in terms of leadership. Maybe the way that he's changed his reputation as a me guy to a we guy. I think you also look at the way that the team has evolved defensively. You mentioned Clayton White. They saved this maybe the best defensive effort for last year and has you ready for the game against Clemson on Saturday. So I can't say enough about Coach Beamer, this coaching staff, and the players themselves for not mailing it in, because we've seen teams mail it in. When they were sitting at 2-6, they had every reason in the world to mail it in, and they've done anything but that down the stretch.
Shows great culture for sure within the program. Nobody questioned that, but another example of that strong culture in Columbia. To Knoxville, Tennessee, we go, Chris. Georgia just flexes those muscles yet again. Carson Beck is fantastic. Tennessee scores on that first play of the game, but it wasn't much good after that. What did you see from the back-to-back national champions?
Yeah, I go back and just look at the 10,000-foot level at what we thought was going to be maybe the toughest 4-game stretch in successive weeks that we'd seen in a long time, and Georgia makes it look easy. Really, barely any of them single-digit games. Missouri, I guess, was the only one at 9 points, I think. But they are far and away the best team, the best accumulation of talent, the best playing as a group, and the best coach team in the country as well. It's amazing when an opponent gets their attention, they certainly come out swinging. I love the distribution of the football from Carson Beck to so many different weapons. No Lad McConkey, no real problem. Guys like Dylan Bell stepping up, Marcus Rosemy-Jack-Saint having a big ball game. Brock Bowers catching a touchdown. They just have so many pieces offensively that I don't remember Georgia having in a long time on that side of the ball. And Mike Bobo continues to find ways to get the football to some of his best players. Carson Beck has developed into one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And I think Mike Bobo deserves to have a little recognition in the Broyles Award as well. I think if I were to list the top assistants, I'd have to put Mike Bobo in there. I certainly would put Tommy Reese in, the way that they've evolved in Tuscaloosa. And Kirby Moore from Missouri, I think, is deserving of some of that credit as well.
Chris, before we get off of Week 12, the most shocking result of the weekend by far
Yeah.
Auburn pays $1.85 million to lose by 3 touchdowns to New Mexico State. I compared this, Chris, after it happened, and I'm not saying it's going to turn out this way, but my mind just immediately went back to 2007 when Nick Saban and Alabama lost to UL Monroe, and we all know the rest is history from there.
Yeah.
Is it cause for greater concern for you for Auburn and Hugh Freeze's program, or is it just a one-game hiccup where the results didn't make any sense?
Yeah, I think it's a great example of if you're not ready to play, you can lose a ball game to anybody. There's nobody in the world that can look at these rosters side by side and say that Alabama doesn't, or excuse me, Auburn doesn't have the collective better group of talent than what New Mexico State did. But this was not a fluky win for Jerry Kill's team. They dominated on both lines of scrimmage. In the final 30 minutes of that game, New Mexico State outrushed Auburn 146-12. They got 4 sacks to Auburn's none. They converted 7 of 9 third and fourth down tries. They held the ball for almost 20 minutes. So it was as complete a dominant performance in the final 30 minutes as you possibly could have expected. And my colleague Roman Harper, I just saw him this morning as I was leaving the studio. He said, "Man, this is a conspiracy job by Auburn to play possum, the ultimate game of possum, as they try to trick Alabama into not being ready for that game on Saturday in the Iron Bowl." But I do think that this to me is year zero for Hugh Freeze. They've got to go out and upgrade talent. I think is a great learning opportunity, as I said before, but it's also a great recruiting tool to say, hey, we need you, guys on the offensive and defensive lines. We need you to come in. We got some really good momentum on the recruiting trail, but we need to finish strong and find ways to close that gap between where we are and where some of the other top programs in this league are.
And the good news for Auburn, Chris, they are already bowl eligible, which is good news because, as you mentioned, they do have the Alabama Crimson Tide this weekend, a 3:30 kickoff on CBS. So as we look ahead to rivalry weekend, let's start with the Iron Bowl. Do you think Auburn can give Bama some issues? I mean, Jordan-Hare Stadium is a crazy place, but you're coming off the New Mexico State game. I mean, it doesn't feel likely for sure, but I mean, it's a weird rivalry, man. A lot of weird things happen in that game.
Yeah, I have a hard time, coming up with a scenario where I see Auburn, winning this game, short of Alabama just gifting them the game with a bunch of turnovers and other mistakes. But I do think that Alabama's playing their best football. They came out, scored touchdowns on 8 of their first 9 possessions, where a lot of the other SEC teams that were playing inferior talent this weekend sleptwalked through the first half. They were sharp. I think Nick Saban was very pleased with the warm-up for the Iron Bowl on Saturday. So I don't think this is going to be that competitive of a football game. But I do think it certainly, for a less disciplined team, it could set you up for some failure watching what New Mexico State did to Auburn and thinking that you can just show up and sleepwalk through the game if you're Alabama.
Chris, South Carolina and Clemson takes place this week. And, of course, as we've mentioned, bowl eligibility is on the line. I'll ask you because I feel like there's a lot of fan bases out there that claim that, our rivalry is the best rivalry in college football or this rivalry, that rivalry, whatever. What's your experiences or your perception, maybe I should say, of the South Carolina-Clemson rivalry? It's been very streaky of late. Obviously, Clemson, during their great run, 6 straight college ball playoff appearances, they dominated. South Carolina before that, won 5 in a row. We saw the Gamecocks go up to Death Valley last year and get the win and snap that long losing streak. It's the SEC Network primetime game again. So you know what kind of atmosphere you're getting into. Tigers are favored, but, I mean, it feels like this scenario, this game, the outlook of it from Vegas, whatever, it plays into Shane Beamer's hands, man. Like the underdog role, like we're being doubted. We got our home crowd behind us. It's going to make for a fascinating Palmetto Bowl matchup for sure.
Yeah, let me first and foremost congratulate starting the beginning of November, you only got 2 wins on your record. A lot of other fan bases probably would not bring the same energy and enthusiasm. I'm watching this game against another average team on Saturday night, and it's packed, and the atmosphere is going crazy. It just is a great home field advantage. It was one of my favorite places to play as an opponent. So I give a lot of respect and tip of the cap to the fan base there in Columbia for doing what they've done to make that such an intimidating place to play. But I also think you're right. I mean, I think for Shane Beamer, it's about going out and continuing to yank that crown away from Clemson in the state of South Carolina. I obviously paid a lot of attention to the years where Coach Spurrier was in Columbia and what he was able to do in that great run and dominance they had over Clemson. It's funny because it kind of takes me back to my days at Florida. Like growing up, a kid, Georgia dominated the series against the Gators, and so I was always of the opinion that Georgia was the number one game on the schedule. And then during the 90s, I think we won all but one of them, and a lot of the newer fans looked at Florida State or maybe Tennessee as the biggest rival. I think it's all about when you kind of grow up in this rivalry. So Clemson's owned it for the last few years prior to last season, and I still think it means an awful lot for bragging rights within the state, and it's a game of some real mutual disdain towards one another.
Chris, sticking with the SEC, ACC matchups, let's go to Gainesville. Florida and Florida State. It's a battle of backup quarterbacks, unfortunately. Of course, the terrible injury that happened to Jordan Travis last week. And I know Gator fans hated to see that because you want to see the best on both sides. But Graham Mertz is more than likely going to be out for this game as well. It's a 7 o'clock kick on ESPN. We talked about Billy Napier. I don't know that you have to win, but this one, Chris, does feel very important in regards to playing a tight, competitive ball game, at least taking FSU to the wire. You get blown out here, and all of a sudden, his future, which we feel pretty confident in, would you agree, it becomes somewhat murky what the future lies ahead?
Yeah, I have a hard time picturing a scenario where Coach Napier's not back on the sideline next year. I do think you have to have some patience. I think you have to have a little bit of the longer term view and understanding what's being built there. I have a lot of respect for what he's done in accumulating talent the last 2 years, both through the transfer portal and the recruiting signing classes. You're seeing a lot of that take shape on Saturdays with guys like Trey Wilson, the freshman, who's had a great season. Watching what Graham Mertz was able to do in this offense, watching what Ricky Pearsall has been able to do the last 2 years. So I trust the evaluation of talent, and I trust the coaching ability. There are a lot of things to clean up, but what a great opportunity to wash that bad taste of a very mediocre season out of your mouth if you're a Gator fan and can knock off your arch rival, keep them out of the college football playoffs, and get to bowl eligibility all at senior day in the Swamp. So I know Florida will be ready to go, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they kind of build a package offensively around Max Brown, who's got a very different style of his game than what Graham Mertz does.
Chris, sticking with the rivalry week theme, what was your favorite memory against Florida State as a player?
Probably my senior year, 1995. It was our last home game. I had my parents out there in the field for the senior day celebration. It's very difficult kind of to switch gears from having that emotional moment. I remember kind of being in tears on the bus the whole drive over to the stadium, knowing it was going to be my last time doing that, and seeing my family out there. Then having to kind of refocus and get ready for the ball game. We were undefeated, trying to stay that way to work our way into the college football at that time, which was the whatever it was, the national championship game. But I ended up catching a touchdown right before halftime to break the single season and career SEC touchdown records. So that stood out to me. And then being able to beat our arch rival by double digits after really struggling with them throughout my previous time there in Gainesville was a great way to cap off my career as a Gator there in Gainesville.
Those Steve Spurrier, Bobby Bowden matchups were something special.
Yeah.
Outside of Florida State, because I know obviously your heart has you got a real respect for that one. Favorite rivalry and most underrated rivalry in your mind in college football?
I think underrated rivalry. I don't think a lot of people maybe outside of the state of Mississippi or outside of the SEC footprint understand, what that dynamic's like in the Egg Bowl. But that's one. I'm glad it's on Thursday. I love it being played on Thanksgiving.
Pure hatred, Chris, what I've heard. It's like a nasty hate.
Yeah, one that certainly is undervalued there. I would think the Clemson South Carolina rivalry is one that definitely is very intriguing to me as well. I'm anxious to see this year what Kentucky can do. They've had a well below what I expected season. I think if they finish 6-6, it's disastrous. But you could go out there knock off your arch rival, send them to the ACC championship game with a loss. So I think that's one that I'm kind of anxious to see how Kentucky maybe picks themselves up off the mat after a disappointing year for them as a whole.
Chris, looking at the college football playoff picture, and of course, Florida State is right there in the thick of that. A really interesting topic that's come up today, and unfortunately, because of the injury, is if Florida State goes undefeated, and we know Jordan Travis is out, in your opinion, do you feel like they should still be in the college football playoff? Do you feel like it'd be unfair to punish them for knowing that, hey, you don't have your quarterback, there's a team behind them that maybe you think, okay, they're better because they don't have Jordan Travis? Like, how do you feel that should be handled? Is it fair to leave FSU out, or would you say they deserve to be in if they can finish off this thing undefeated?
Well, I think the committee has given some guidance on, if a major injury occurs that you have to take into consideration. Is it the same team that's put up, the majority of the body of work without that particular player? That'll be a question that the committee will be able to evaluate with the way that the quarterback played. What's his name? Rodemaker, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't even really studied them up yet, but how they play against Florida and how they play against Louisville in the ACC championship game. I think it's premature to make that decision now, but I do think that provides a little bit of an out for the committee. I also think it'll be interesting to see the whole Texas and Alabama dynamic. If Alabama is able to run the table and finishes the season as a one-loss SEC champion, it's hard for me to fathom a playoffs that doesn't include an SEC team in it, but that's the reality that we live in with the head-to-head victory that the Longhorns secured earlier in the season. So I think it's only fitting that we're watching things come down to the wire here in the last year of the 14 playoffs and having as much still out there to be decided as we have now. We haven't had chaos yet, Chris, and I'm wondering if this is the week that we get a little bit of chaos with some of these rivalry games nationally.
It does seem, Chris, that rivalry week is the week where chaos ensues. And on that note, Chris, forget you out of your last thing, sticking with the college ball playoff. There are some out there that are concerned about the SEC standings if Alabama were to beat Georgia in the SEC title game. Maybe things get a little bit sideways because you've got Oregon out there. You've got, of course, the winner of the Ohio State-Michigan game in the Big Ten. You've got Texas out there. Like you got Washington, of course. Your thoughts on if Bama beats Georgia? I mean, I wouldn't bet against Georgia right now, but if Bama does beat Georgia, let's say by a field goal, should both be in? I don't think there's ever a scenario where neither'd be in, right? Like you got to have one, but should both be in, I guess, would be my question. And how much does that depend on how the rest of college ball just plays out the next couple of weeks?
You can make the argument that the SEC could get left out. I mean, if you have an undefeated Big Ten champion, you got an undefeated Florida State out of the ACC, you got an undefeated Washington out of the Pac-12, and then it comes down to Texas and Alabama. As I mentioned before, head-to-head matters. And so I think in that scenario, the SEC would get left out. It's an interesting argument, too, for Georgia. I mean, Georgia – the schedule didn't look all that challenging at the beginning of the year, but you look at the stretch they've gone through in the last 4 weeks. They've had victories over 3 ranked teams. So their one loss would come to probably a top 4 Alabama team. So I do think there is a lot that can be argued right now. But the one thing I don't want to see is I don't want to see a close loss by a Big Ten team that keeps them in the mix. The Big Ten schedule is a joke. You play one game a year when you get to the final week of the season. You can't even pass off to me that Penn State is a legitimate topic of conversation for a real quality win. So I'm tired of even hearing about the idea that Michigan or Ohio State both could get into the college football playoffs this year. But I think so much of what happens in the SEC depends on what happens around the country as well.
Chris, just humor me for a moment. If the SEC were to be left out of the college ball playoff, what do you think the reaction would be?
I think it'd be shock. Even though the college football playoff committee is instructed to take a look at only this year, I think it's only human nature to look through the lens of what the previous years have told us, and that's that the best football is played in the Southeastern Conference. The problem is that the SEC didn't do their job in weeks 1, weeks 2, and week 3. So you kind of are who you are individually as a program and the totality as a conference. So that's why I think this weekend is so important. You get a chance to step out of conference against 4 rivals from the ACC. If the SEC could win all 4 of those ball games, I think it would certainly atone for what happened in the month of September.
Chris Doering of SEC Network, one of the best in the business to talk all things SEC. Chris, this is always a blast. I appreciate you taking the time. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours, and we'll do it again next week on SEC Championship Week, my friend. Can't wait to talk.
Yeah, likewise. Happy Thanksgiving to y'all, and look forward to being on next week, man. Take care.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you.